"Ma, that lady is crying. Can we do something?" Iris Whitfield looked down at her 9-year-old granddaughter, then across the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly on Route 9. A woman was sitting on the curb next to a shopping cart, pressing her palms against her eyes. She was maybe 40, wearing scrubs the color of old mint, and her shoulders were shaking. It was February in Savannah, Georgia, cold the way February gets in the South, not brutal, but damp and mean. The kind of cold that finds the spaces between your buttons. Iris was 61 years old. She had $43 in her checking account and a bag of groceries she'd carefully calculated before putting a single item in her cart. She had no business stopping. The bus came at 4:15 and it wouldn't wait. But her granddaughter was already pulling her hand. Iris crossed the parking lot. She crouched down in front of the woman. "Honey, you all right?" The woman looked up. Her name tag said, St. Augustine Home Health. Her eyes were red and wet. "I'm fine," she said, which was obviously not true. My car died. I've got a client I'm supposed to check on in 40 minutes and no way to get there and my phone is—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I'm sorry, I'm fine." Iris opened her purse. She took out the emergency 20 she kept folded behind her library card. She held it out. "For a ride share," she said. "Don't argue with me about it." The woman stared at the bill. "I can't take that." "You're not taking it. I'm giving it. There's a difference." Iris pressed it into her hand, stood up, and adjusted her granddaughter's collar. "You get to your client. That's what matters." The woman with the name tag clutched the $20 and looked up at Iris like she'd seen something she'd stopped believing in a long time ago. What Iris didn't know, what she had no possible way of knowing, was that the woman sitting on that curb was the daughter of the man who owned the assisted living facility that was about to decide whether to keep Iris's mother or send her away. And that decision was coming in 72 hours. To understand what happened next, you need to understand who Iris Whitfield was. Not the version she'd become by necessity. The woman who counted cans in the grocery store and said no to things without letting the no show on her face. You need to understand where she started. Iris had been a school teacher for 23 years. 4th grade, Chatham County Public Schools. She'd taught reading to children who came to school hungry, who fell asleep at their desks, who showed up with bruises they didn't want to explain. She'd kept a drawer full of granola bars and a box of clean socks in the back of her classroom. Not because anyone told her to, because she saw what was in front of her and responded to it. That was simply who she was. She'd been married once, to a man named Douglas, who was funny and loving, and died of a stroke at 54, leaving her with a mortgage she couldn't quite make, and a grief she'd learned to carry quietly so her daughter wouldn't worry. Her daughter, Renee, lived 3 hours away in Atlanta with her husband and their daughter, Lily, the same Lily who tugged Iris's hand in the parking lot. Lily came to stay with Iris every February during school break. It was a tradition they'd started when Lily was 5, and now, 4 years later, it was the thing Iris looked forward to most. Iris had retired from teaching 2 years ago when her knees made standing for 6 hours a day too painful. Her pension was $1,640 a month. Her mortgage was $890. What was left had to cover everything else: utilities, groceries, prescriptions for her blood pressure, and the co-pay she paid every month for her mother's room at Cedarwood Gardens. Her mother, Etta, was 83. She'd been at Cedarwood for 2 years, since the fall that broke her hip and made it clear she couldn't live alone anymore. The facility was not fancy. The hallways smelled like disinfectant and something underneath it that no amount of disinfectant quite covered, but the staff were kind. Etta's nurse, a round-faced woman named Beverly who called her Miss Etta, brought her chamomile tea every night at 8 o'clock. That mattered. That was worth something. Money couldn't fully calculate. What money could calculate was this: Cedarwood's monthly rate was going up. The new administration, a corporate group out of Jacksonville that had purchased a facility 8 months ago, had sent a letter in January. Effective April 1st, the monthly rate for standard care would increase from $3,200 to $4,100. Private pay only. Medicaid pending cases would need to be re-evaluated. Etta's Medicaid application had been pending for 7 months. Iris had called the county office 4 times. Each time she was told that processing times were currently running 6 to 9 months and that there was nothing they could do to expedite. The woman on the phone the last time had sounded genuinely sorry, which somehow made it worse. The math didn't work. It hadn't worked since the letter arrived. Iris had spread the numbers across her kitchen table 3 different times, hoping they'd rearrange themselves into something manageable. They didn't. What Iris did not yet know was that the corporate group's regional director, the man who would decide in 72 hours whether to grant Etta a continued stay extension while the Medicaid application processed, was a man named Garrett Folsom, and the woman in the parking lot, the home health aide sitting on the curb in mint green scrubs, was his daughter, Cora. Cora Folsom was 38. She'd chosen a different life than her father expected, which had created a distance between them that neither had fully repaired. Garrett had built a healthcare management company over 30 years. He was not a bad man. He was a precise one. He believed in systems. He believed that systems, when properly designed, serve everyone. He had not always stopped to consider what happened to the people who fell between the systems. Cora had considered it every single day for 12 years. She'd become a home health aide after her own grandmother spent her last 18 months in a facility where no one remembered her name from one week to the next. That had broken something in Cora that she'd rebuilt into purpose. She made $17.40 an hour. She drove 180 miles a week, seeing clients across 3 counties. She knew every client's medication schedule, their food preferences, the names of their grandchildren, and the television programs that helped them sleep. On the afternoon, Iris found her in the parking lot. Cora's car had thrown a belt on Route 9. She'd coasted into the Piggly Wiggly lot on fumes and momentum, and then sat on the curb because sometimes you just have to sit for a minute before you can figure out what to do next. She'd been calculating whether she could afford both the tow and a rideshare when a woman she'd never met crossed a parking lot and put $20 in her hand. Cora got to her client 14 minutes late, which she spent the rest of the afternoon apologizing for. She arranged the tow. She got the car to the shop. She called her father's assistant at 6 p.m. to let him know she wouldn't make Sunday dinner because of everything, and when his assistant asked if she'd like to leave a message, Cora said, "Tell him a stranger was kind to me today. Tell him I'm still thinking about it." The assistant did not pass on the message, but that part of the story comes later. 3 days later, Iris sat in a beige waiting area on the 2nd floor of Cedarwood Gardens, across from a man in a blazer who had introduced himself as Mr. Denning, the facility's new resident services coordinator. He had a folder. He opened it. He explained the situation in language designed to sound neutral while delivering news that wasn't. Given Mrs. Whitfield's pending Medicaid status, the facility has to consider financial clearance going forward. The new rate takes effect April 1st. Which is 7 weeks away. Without either proof of Medicaid approval or a 3-month payment deposit of approximately $12,300, we may need to discuss alternative placement options for your mother. Iris looked at him. Alternative placement. There are several facilities in the county that have Medicaid-certified beds available. What are the facilities? He listed 2 names. Iris knew one of them. A woman from her church had moved her own father there 2 years ago and cried about it every Sunday for 6 months. "My mother has been here 2 years, Iris said. She knows the staff. She has a routine. Her nurse brings her chamomile tea at 8 o'clock. She paused. "Do you understand what disruption does to a woman who is 83 years old and already confused half the time?" "I understand this is very difficult." "I'm not asking if you understand that it's difficult. I'm asking if you understand what moving her would do to her." Mr. Denning looked at the folder. "I'm sorry, Ms. Whitfield. The decision comes from the regional level. There's a review on Friday." Friday was 3 days away. Iris went home. Lily was at the kitchen table drawing, and Iris stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment watching her without saying anything. Then she went to the table and sat down. "Nana, are you sad?" "I'm thinking." "About what?" "About your great-grandma Etta." Lily put down her crayon. She was 9 and she understood more than adults generally gave her credit for. "Is she okay?" "She's going to be okay," Iris said. "I'm going to make sure of that." She didn't know yet how. But she'd said it, and once Iris Whitfield said something out loud to a child she loved, it became a fact she had to make true. She made 3 calls that evening. The first was to the county Medicaid office, which went to voicemail. The second was to her daughter Brene, who immediately offered to help financially in a way that Iris could hear was going to stretch her thin, and who Iris thanked and told firmly she'd call her back. The third was to a legal aid organization she'd found online. They were kind. They said their earliest available consultation was in 3 weeks. She went to bed at midnight with the folder of bills spread across the kitchen table and woke at 5 a.m. Not because her alarm went off, but because her body had given up on sleep entirely. Across town, Garrett Folsom was also awake early. He was in the study of his house on Abercorn Street, reviewing facility reports on his laptop, a cup of coffee going cold beside him. He was 64 years old. He had built his company from a single acquired nursing home in 1998 into a regional operation managing 11 facilities across Georgia and Florida. He employed over 800 people. He believed in what he did. He told himself that regularly. What he was less sure about, at 5 a.m. on a Wednesday, was whether the version of what he did now was still what he'd intended to build. The systems had grown. The efficiencies had multiplied. The corporate structure had thickened with layers of coordinators and analysts and compliance officers until the distance between a decision made in his study and its effect on a woman named Etta in room 114 was longer than he sometimes liked to think about. His phone showed a missed call from Cora and a message from his assistant. "Your daughter says a stranger was kind to her. She's still thinking about it." Garrett read the message twice, set the phone down, picked it up again. Cora worked in home health care, which meant she was on the front edge of everything he managed from a distance. They disagreed about that distance, had disagreed about it for years. She thought he'd lost sight of the people. He thought she didn't understand the scale required to serve them. Neither was entirely wrong. He called her. She answered on the third ring, surprised. "Dad, it's early." "I know. What happened?" "The message said a stranger helped you." She told him the story. The car on Route 9. The parking lot. The woman in the cold who crossed a lot she didn't have to cross and put $20 in her hand. "She had a little girl with her," Cora said. 9, maybe 10. "It was the little girl who noticed me first." Garrett was quiet. "I've been thinking about it since it happened," Cora said. "Someone who doesn't have extra, you could tell she didn't have extra. She gave it anyway. Just like that, no hesitation." She paused. "I don't know. I just keep thinking about who she was, what her life looked like." After they hung up, Garrett sat in his study for a long time. Then he did something he hadn't done in several months. He pulled up the pending case files for Cedarwood Gardens and he read them. Not the summary. The actual files. The applications, the call logs, the notes from the coordinator. He read the file for room 114, Etta Whitfield, 83. Hip fracture. Moderate dementia. Stable. Medicaid application, pending 7 months. Next of kin. Daughter. Iris Whitfield. Contact log. 4 calls to county office. 3 calls to facility billing. 1 meeting scheduled Friday. He read the notes from the calls. He read what the coordinator had told her. He sat with the number $12,300 and he thought about what that number meant from where he was sitting and what it meant from where she was sitting. They were not the same number. Then he opened a new document and started writing. On Thursday afternoon, a day before the Friday review, Iris was at Cedarwood Gardens visiting her mother. She did this every Thursday, same time, 2 hours. She brought Etta a butterscotch candy from the gas station on Victory Drive because Etta had loved butterscotch since before Iris could remember, and some things you keep doing not because they're enough, but because they are what you have. Etta was having a clear day. She recognized Iris right away, which was not guaranteed anymore, and felt, when it happened, like a small grace. "Baby," Etta said, reaching for her hand, "you look tired." "I'm fine, Mama." "Don't tell me you're fine when you look like you're carrying the whole street on your shoulders. I know your face." Iris sat beside the bed and held her mother's hand. She did not tell her about the meeting. About the $12,300. About alternative placement. She talked about Lily instead, about the drawing Lily had made that morning. about how the child had her father's nose and Renee's stubbornness, and something entirely her own that neither of them could fully name. Etta listened with her eyes half closed, smiling. "She sounds like you," Etta said, "when you were little. You were always noticing things, people, mostly. You'd come home from school and tell me about every child who seemed sad that day." She squeezed Iris's hand. "That's a gift. Most people don't see. You always saw." Iris pressed her mother's hand to her cheek and closed her eyes. Beverly knocked, came in with the evening medication. She set the cup down, then touched Iris's shoulder briefly, the way you touch someone when words don't add anything. On the way out, Iris stopped at the front desk. She asked to speak to Mr. Denning. She was told he was out of the building. She asked if there were any updates before Friday's review. The receptionist checked her screen and shook her head. Iris walked to the parking lot. She sat in her car for 4 minutes, not driving anywhere. Then she drove home. Friday morning, Iris arrived at Cedarwood at 9 a.m. for the review meeting, which had been scheduled for 9:30. She sat in the waiting area with her folder of documents, Etta's medical records, the Medicaid application reference number, a letter from the county office confirming the application was active, and a list of references from people who could speak to Etta's stability at the facility. She'd been up until midnight preparing it. At 9:25, Mr. Denning came down the hallway. With him was a man Iris didn't recognize. Tall, gray-haired, wearing a simple button-down with no tie. "Miss Whitfield," Mr. Denning said. "This is Mr. Folsom. He's the regional director." Iris stood. "Good morning." Garrett Folsom held out his hand. He had the eyes of someone who had read something recently that had rearranged him. "Good morning. I drove down from Savannah this morning. I wanted to be here for this one in person." They went into the small conference room. Iris set her folder on the table. She was prepared to argue. She'd spent 3 days preparing to argue. But Garrett spoke before she could. "I've reviewed your mother's file thoroughly. I want to tell you something directly, and I want you to hear it the way I mean it, not the way these conversations usually go." Iris waited. "Your mother's stay at Cedarwood Gardens will continue without interruption. We are extending her rate hold at the current amount while the Medicaid application processes, however long that takes. The April rate increase will not apply to her case." He paused. "That's not a negotiation. It's a decision I made yesterday." Iris stared at him. The folder sat unopened on the table. "Why?" she said. "Not ungrateful. Genuinely asking." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "My daughter was in a parking lot on Route 9 3 days ago. Her car had broken down. She was sitting on a curve and she didn't know what to do next." He looked at Iris carefully. "A woman with a little girl came over and gave her $20 for a ride share. She didn't have to do that. She did it anyway." The air in the conference room changed. Iris felt the back of her neck prickle. She thought about the parking lot. The woman in the scrubs. The name tag she hadn't really registered. She thought about Lily's hand tugging hers. "That was your daughter," Iris said. "That was my daughter." Neither of them said anything for a moment. "I run 11 facilities," Garrett said quietly. 800 and some employees. I make decisions every week that affect hundreds of people, and I don't always—" He stopped, started again. "I've been doing this long enough that some of it stopped feeling like what it actually is. Reading your mother's file reminded me. Your daughter coming to find her in a parking lot reminded my daughter. And my daughter reminded me." Iris looked at the man across the table. She thought about her mother's hand on her cheek, about Beverly bringing chamomile tea at 8 o'clock, about the number $12,300 and what it had done to her sleep for the past 3 weeks. "There are other families in this building," Iris said. "Other people in your other facilities, people who don't have anyone who happened to cross the right parking lot." Garrett nodded slowly. "I know." "What happens to them?" It was the same question Keandra had asked in a different city in a different story, and it lands the same way every time it is asked, like something dropped from a height. "That," Garrett said, "is what I'm going home to figure out." He didn't figure it out overnight. Real things don't work that way, and this story won't pretend they do. What Garrett did was call his operations director the following Monday and ask for a full audit of every pending Medicaid case across all 11 facilities. He wanted to know how many families were in Iris's situation. How many people were waiting in beige rooms with folders they prepared at midnight? How many calls had gone to voicemail? The number was 34. 34 families. 34 people like Etta, waiting in rooms where the staff knew their names and the routines that kept them anchored, facing the possibility of being moved to wherever the Medicaid-certified beds were available. Garrett spent 2 weeks working with his legal and finance teams on a policy he called the Bridge Standard. Simple in principle, any resident with an active documented Medicaid application would be granted a rate hold and continued stay for up to 12 months while the application processed. No deposit required. No alternative placement discussions until the process had run its course. The policy cost money. His CFO showed him the projections over 3 different meetings. Garrett listened, asked questions, and signed off. In month 4, 2 of the 34 applications came through approved. In month 6, 11 more. 3 residents passed away while waiting. 2 were transferred voluntarily by families who found better fits. The rest stayed. Etta Whitfield's Medicaid application was approved in month 8. Beverly kept bringing chamomile tea at 8 o'clock. Iris found out about the Bridge Standard 3 months after it launched, from another family at Cedarwood who mentioned it in passing in the parking lot after Sunday visiting hours. She went home and looked it up. She read the language on the facility's website, which was careful and institutional, as corporate language always is. But she understood what it meant. She understood exactly what it had taken to make it happen and what it would mean for the families who came after her. She sat at her kitchen table with the policy document open on her laptop, and she thought about a parking lot in February, about the name tag she hadn't read carefully enough, about $20 she'd given away because a child tugged on her hand and it was the right thing to do. She thought about how you cannot always know what you're setting in motion when you cross a parking lot you don't have to cross. Lily came back for spring break in April. She was working on a new drawing. She was always working on something. This one was a woman standing in front of a large building. The woman's arms were wide open, like she was about to hug the whole street. "Who's that?" Iris asked. Lily held it up with great seriousness. "That's you, Nana. I put you in front of the school where you used to teach because that's where you were the most you." Iris looked at the drawing for a long moment. The woman in it had curly gray hair and her hands open like she was ready to catch something. "Can I keep this?" Lily considered it. "I need to finish the clouds first," she said. But then, yes. It took Lily 20 more minutes to finish the clouds. She drew them in yellow and pink, the colors of a Savannah evening, and she signed her name in the corner in green crayon, neat and careful, the way she did everything. Iris hung it on the wall above the kitchen table, where she could see it from where she sat every morning with her coffee. She didn't hang it there to remember what had happened. She hung it there to remember what she'd already known, that you don't give what you have because you know what will come back. You give it because the person in front of you needs it, and you still can. That's the whole of it. That's where it starts. From down the hall, she heard her mother's voice on the phone with Beverly, complaining cheerfully about the butterscotch being the wrong kind this week. Iris smiled. She picked up her coffee. Outside, the Georgia sun was doing what it does in April, filling everything up with more light than you think you can hold. She held it anyway. I keep coming back to that $20 bill, the way Iris had it folded behind her library card, not in her wallet with the rest of her money, because there wasn't much rest of her money. She kept it separate, an emergency fund small enough to fit in the crease of a card, and the moment she saw someone who needed it more, she didn't hesitate. She just gave it away. That's the part that gets me every time, not the twist, not the way everything connected, the moment before any of that. When Iris still didn't know anything would come of it, when giving that $20 meant she had $23 less to her name, and she did it anyway because a little girl tugged on her hand and she looked up and saw someone hurting. I think about what it actually takes to do that. And I don't think it's just kindness. I think it's a kind of character that gets built slowly, over years, in the small choices no one's watching you make. Iris spent 23 years keeping granola bars in the desk drawer for kids who came to school hungry. Nobody gave her a prize for that. Nobody made a video about it. She just saw what was in front of her and responded to it over and over until that response became who she was. That's what moral character actually looks like. Not a dramatic gesture, but a practice. Something you do so consistently that it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like the only possible thing you could do. And then there's Garrett. I don't think he's a villain in this story. I think he's something more honest than that. A person who built something good, then got far enough from the ground level that he stopped feeling the weight of his own decisions. It took his daughter calling him from a parking lot, telling him a stranger had been kind to her, to make him go back and read the actual files. The actual names: Room 114, Etta Whitfield. 7 months waiting. 4 phone calls that went nowhere. What I find meaningful about that is, it wasn't guilt that changed him. It was clarity. Someone reminded him of something he already knew, and he was sharp enough and honest enough with himself to act on it. That kind of clear-eyed self-reckoning is its own form of intelligence, not the kind that shows up on a balance sheet. The kind that asks, is what I'm building still what I meant to build? And Iris. She kept going. Through the phone calls that went to voicemail, the legal aid appointment 3 weeks out, the middle of the night math that never added up, she sat in that waiting room with a folder she prepared until midnight, ready to fight for her mother in a room that wasn't designed for fighting. That's not luck. That's a person who has decided, somewhere quiet and private inside themselves, that giving up is simply not available as an option. Not while her mother is still in room 114, not while there's still a call to make, a form to file, a folder to prepare. I think what Iris's story actually shows is that the 3 things that carry people through, the will to do right, the wisdom to keep thinking clearly when everything feels impossible, and the refusal to stop, those aren't separate qualities. They live together. They build on each other. Iris had all 3, which is why a $20 bill in a parking lot didn't just help one woman in scrubs. It traveled. It found its way back. It became a policy that protected 34 families. You can't always know what you're setting in motion when you do a small thing well. But it moves. It always moves.